Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Imagination Station's virtual summer science. I want to thank you all so much for waiting for us. We are so sorry that this happened, but we are extremely excited to get started and do our experiment with you. So we are going to be doing a density tower today. So what is density, you might be asking? Well, density is how many molecules can fit in one small space, can fit in a certain space. So imagine our tables or other things. So if there's the molecules are the really small little things that make up everything. So something that's less dense might look like this and have its small molecules or dots placed far out from each other. It turns off. Something that's a little bit more dense might look like this and have its dots a little bit more frequently and closer together. But something that's really dense might look like this. They're all super close together and it works, and the dots are all super close together. And as you can see, compared to the less dense, it's pretty different. So when these different densities come together, they cannot mix. So let's get started on our experiment. So for that today, we are going to be using water, vegetable oil, corn syrup, light corn syrup, and honey. I'm going to use about 50 milliliters of each of these, but you can use however much you want, and you can use different ingredients if you like. If you do use different ingredients, you might want to expect it to look a little bit different when it comes out, but it'll still be just as cool. I'm also going to be using 3 little plastic and glass beakers and a larger one so I can pour everything in. And I also have a spatula, a spoon, and this is called a scupula. We use it to scrape stuff and other stuff in chemistry and other experiments. So you can really probably get by with only a spoon, but I like to have all 3 just in case. So along with that, I'm also going to be using a couple different items. Now, these can be any household items you find around, but you can use whatever you want. We're going to be using these styrofoam beads, normal plastic beads, and marbles. So again, the ingredients you're going to want to use are water, vegetable oil, light corn syrup, honey, some household items, some containers, and water. I have about 50 milliliters of each, so let's get pouring. So I'm going to pour my vegetable oil first, and I want it to be about 50 milliliters. So on this, there's a line, but you can really do however much you want. I just suggest making sure they're even so it works best. There, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it should be close. Next, I'm going to do my light corn syrup. And finally, I'm going to do my honey. I already had the water measured out earlier, so I don't need to do that now. The honey might take a little bit longer because honey is so sticky, and I feel like it never wants to come out of the container when I need it. So now we have each of our ingredients. And like I said earlier, density is how compact the molecules of an object are. So something that's less dense, like our water, might look like this. But something that's very dense, like our honey, might look like this. So the thing with densities is they will not mix with each other. So if they're far apart in density, and you calculate density by dividing the mass of it, so the weight, not really the weight, but how much gravity is acting upon it, by the volume, which is how much space it's taking up. So when you divide those, you get this number called density, and that's how compact the molecules are. Now, if the densities are far apart, they won't mix with each other. So something like honey and water are going to stay separate, and that's what this experiment is going to show you. So let's get pouring. I'm going to put my honey on the bottom layer because it is the densest. So I'm going to use my spatula for this to make it quick. Now You may have noticed that while I'm doing this, I am wearing a mask. That is because we want to keep everyone here at the Imagination Station safe. And though it may look like I'm alone, there are a few people behind the scenes helping me to make sure everything goes right. I'm going to get as much of the honey out as possible. And you may notice that it's making a little bit of a mess, and that is because honey is so sticky. So parents at home, you might want to have your kids help. You might want to help out your kids a little bit. But be prepared. You might need a little bit of cleanup. I know I'm sure going to have to after this. All right, now that I'm done with my honey, I am going to move on to my next ingredient, the light corn syrup. This one is sticky and a little bit stretchy, but not as bad as the honey. So let's get pouring. And now I'm going to use my spoon to get it out. Try not to mix it. Now, honey and corn syrup are naturally different colors, but if you wanted to do this experiment again and hope to see it a little bit better, you could dye them different colors. So let's take a look at our container now that we have some stuff in. It's a little hard to tell, but you can definitely see the separation in colors. That is because honey and the light corn syrup have different densities and they won't mix together. Let's add something to see how it reacts. Let's say a marble. I'm going to drop it in and we're going to see where it goes. If it stays in the corn syrup layer, that may mean that it is less dense than the corn syrup, or more dense than the corn syrup, but less dense than the honey. So if I drop it in, oh man, it is going all the way to the bottom of the container. That means that it is more dense than the honey and the corn syrup. And now that it's sat for a little bit longer, you can see the separation of the colors even better. So let's add our next ingredient. I'm going to be adding vegetable oil. I'm going to pour this in, and as you can see, it's kind of like, it's very slippery and it's coming out very easily. So I don't think I'm going to need to scrape this time. And wow, you can see even better how cool the layers are. They're each separated and staying apart. So let's drop another item in and see how it reacts. How about something like a plastic bead? Whenever I drop this in, wherever it stays, that will be how dense it is. Okay, so this bead looks like it is underneath the corn syrup, but sitting right on top of underneath the vegetable oil, but right on top of the corn syrup. So that means that it is less dense than the corn syrup, but more dense than the vegetable oil. It looks just kind of like it's floating in the middle. And if I shake it around a little bit, you can see that it is floating on top of the corn syrup. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat. We are happy to answer them. And I just want to say again that we are so sorry for the technical difficulties at the beginning, but we are so happy to be doing the experiment with you now. So finally, let's add water. If you've heard the phrase oil and water don't mix, that's because of density. So I'm sure at this point you can expect what's going to happen. Now, as I pour this in, you can't really tell because the screen's lower, but the water did go straight to the bottom and they're a little bit mixed together now. But if I give some time for the air bubbles to settle, then they will be completely separated again. There we go. So they are separate, and on the bottom, we have our honey. Then we have our corn syrup. Then we have our vegetable oil, and then we have our water. They're all separate because they all have different densities. So let's add our last item. So this is a styrofoam bead. It's pretty simple. We just found it from a box we had. And I'm going to drop it in, and depending on which level it lands on, that'll determine the density. I'm dropping it in. It is floating on top of the top layer, which, if you remember, was water. But it is a little bit, it seems to be sinking down a little bit as we go. So it could be around the same density as water, or it could be less dense than the water and just floating on top. I'll give you guys a minute to look at that. And if you're doing your own at home, you can look at yours and see how cool it is. So that's our density tower. As you can see, there's a bunch of different layers with they're all separate. Oil and water don't mix, and stuff with different densities don't mix. So again, the very dense honey would not mix with the slightly less dense corn syrup. And that's because they have different densities, and the corn syrup has less compact molecules than the honey does. So what if we mix something that has a very close density? Let's say something like apple cider vinegar and water. Now, as before, these didn't mix. So it will be interesting to see what happens when you mix these two together. I'll give it a little bit stir to make sure, but that does not look separate to me. That means that apple cider vinegar and water have very similar densities, and they are willing to mix together. So you can do this with all sorts of different objects, different liquids to see what happens. But all around, I think it's a pretty cool experiment. And I want to thank you guys all so much for doing this today. My name is Riley. I work here at the Imagination Station. If you are doing this experiment at home and you have any questions, please feel free to email them to us at a later time or ask them in the chat. We would love to answer them. And feel free to take a picture and tag us in it, because we love to see what you guys are doing at home. We hope you all have a great day. And join us again for our next experiment. Bye.